Are we on? Yes, looks like we are. Greetings, my followers of darkness, shadows, scavengers, and villains aficionados. I'm your host, like always, Lord of Shadows, and welcome. Bienvenue to another Villains Review episode. And this time, I have a real treat, or I would say an interesting evil patient to discuss about. And it's gonna be none other than Valdo Golini. Now, of course, you're thinking, who the fuck is that? Well, maybe you know him as Dark Might. If you don't know still who he is basically the main villain and the leader of the Golini family, but most importantly, he is the villain of the new My Hero Academia movie. You're next. By the way, if you haven't watched the movie, check it out. It's actually pretty good. I would say another triumph for the My Hero Academia movie series, for sure. Now, as I always, I'm here to discuss, criticize, kind of comment on like the pros and cons and flaws and everything when it comes to villains. So I'm going to do the same today with Dark Knight. Now, before I go into, let's get a little bits and pieces of who this Dark Knight is. So basically, as I said, his real name is Valdo Golini. He is basically the leader of a crime family known as the Golini family, and he took the mantle of Dark Knight, and he's a villain who was incredibly obsessed since the very beginning with All Might. He was a big fanatical admirer of his beliefs, of his strengths, of his actions, and basically after his last fight with All for One, spoiler alert if you haven't seen the anime or manga, basically when All Might said, you're next, pointed the camera and everything, Dark Might basically took it as oh yeah, he's pointing at me. No worries, All Might. I'm gonna make you proud. I'm gonna be your true successor. And that's where basically all the shenanigans basically comes in. So now, I will be honest, when I first saw Dark Knight, I felt like, when I was watching the My Hero Academia trailer, I felt like, at first I was like, are we talking like a clone type of story where usually, when they make a copy of a very famous superhero, but this time, where they turn him into like a evil version of and everything? Or is this more like a reverse Flash kind of thing, at least like from my point of view? And actually, it's a bit of the second thing with the reverse Flash thing and everything, So basically, as I mentioned before, like Dark Might is basically especially when after I seen the movie, when I was trying to kind of like observe about this villain, where he is, where he comes from, pros and cons and everything, and basically, as I said before, Dark Might primarily is basically a how can I put this, a hardcore dude who is basically obsessed with All Might, because he used his quirk, which is by the way a very infamous thing in the world of My Hero Academia. He used this quirk, which is alchemy, to kind of shapeshift his face into making him look like All Might, because again, in his overall head, he wanted to be just like him. He saw him as an inspiration. He saw him as an idol, someone that he basically wanted to be from the very beginning. But basically, so overall, he is primarily a villain who basically tries to prove himself to be somebody. Because all his life basically he was criticized. That he's not worthy. For example, leading the crime family, he was not worthy of All Might. He was not worthy of a lot of things. So again, we have what we have right here with Dark Might. We literally have a case of, most of all, not just simply when it comes to obsession, but also imposter syndrome. At least from my point of view, like we have an imposter syndrome character here, which and that is something that is Dark Might is definitely when it comes to imposter syndrome, trying to pretend to be someone that he isn't. So overall, again, when I was watching the movie, I was like kind of really curious to see about Dark Might, to see what kind of villain he is. And I mean, definitely, I mean, I personally, I would say this, definitely he became one of my favorite not only like one of my favorite like My Hero Academia villains, but like even like my favorite My Hero Academia villain in general when it comes to My Hero Academia movies. You know, and again, there were times, when I was like, yep, called for it, like the type of like villain actions he would do. But there are sometimes, the Dark might really, impress me, as an overall villain and everything. Now let's try to go step by step. Okay, shall we? So first and foremost, when we talk about Dark Might, what kind of villain he is? Well, if you watch this movie, so maybe you will agree with me that he's basically a egotistical crime lord. A villain that wants to be somebody. Now, Dark Knight in the movie, he had like many different goals. Like I said, he tried to copy All Might. He wanted to be the next successor. He felt like when he said "you're next," even though he was definitely pointing out at Izuku Midoriya, aka Deku, he thought he was pointing at him. That he's the one who's going to be the next symbol of peace and everything. So again, he wanted to be All Might, the next successor. Second thing, he wanted to blow up the UA building, with all the heroes and everything. But primarily, what he wanted, and again, it was revealed that somewhere like very near the middle of the movie, which is again we're having here a villain that has a very classical old school goal, which of course is world domination. World domination, and try to rebuild it in his own image. Kind of like I believe it's kind of like a very twisted Genghis Khan kind of way. I mean that's at least the way how I see it. So again, very classic goals. Apart from like trying to All Might, and blowing up the UA, building with the heroes and everything. But one thing I do have to say that I kind of find it interesting with the Dark Might is that he's a villain that I would say has three categories in one. Like first and foremost, the guy, primarily he is a supervillain. That's for sure. But secondly, he is also a showman. He's literally a showman, and not to mention like with a very gigantic ego. I mean, just look at the fucking statues that he built in his own like flying ship, land or whatever, with his alchemy quirk. All those statues of himself and everything, like, you could definitely feel that he has a gigantic ego of himself. And of course, the third thing is he's a mobster. He's a gangster, and I'm really curious from where, because there were times I'm like, is it from like Nipple or is it from like Sicily? But then after seeing his father, which kind of is a very Marlon Brando Godfather type of figure, I will say, I believe, I believe that the guy is from Sicily. Which is, by the way, I just want to say, when it comes to his quirk, I have to say, because again, he's a pretender. He's trying to copy All Might and everything. But, we all know that All Might has powers of like, many different like states and cities from like, America. Dark Might has the same thing, but this time with Italy. Like, for example, there's a Torino punch. And then there was another, technique. And basically it had Bologna in it, So I thought that was kind of cool. But, I'm sorry if I'm going to like jumping all over the place and everything, But one thing I will admit, his power was impressive. His quirk is very impressive. I mean, it's like I said, it's alchemy, and basically whatever he touches, he can change matter in his own design. I mean, just look at what he did with it, like not just even from his face, but like from the flying boat, the flying land ship, or whatever he had and everything. Like I mean, and also the way how he used the same alchemy powers to kind of like trying to copy All Might's powers and everything. I have to admit that is very impressive. Now, is it on the same rank as like One for All for One? Saying it like that, I'm kind of make me feel like I'm talking about the Three Musketeers. But anyway, does it mean like it's like on the same level as those powers? No, it's not. But still, for someone like Dark Might, I would say like it's a very impressive quirk, very impressive, and what he was able to do and everything, very impressive. I mean, like the guy, like just starting from the island itself, like the flying ship and everything. Not just simply from the statues, but like the mansion, the different kind of lands that he created, the cities and everything. Like again, Very, very impressive. So overall, so again, the power when it comes to the power thing, very that's a very big plus for me. That part surprised me. Now let's try to go deeper into the character. Now again, I went all over the place, with this character. Now his origin, again, is a type of villain origin that we already seen before. Like someone who other people around him saw him as unworthy, unprepared, like not very skilled. Like for example, his father saying like, you will never be the leader of my family. Sorry if I'm I'm kind of doing the Marlon Brando impression, but like, you will never leave our family, and you will never be like All Might, which of course earned his own father a bullet in the skull, which of course that's exactly what Dark Might or Valdo Golini did. Just simply shot him like right in the head. So basically after that, like I said, he is basically a villain who tried to prove himself, tried to believe that he is someone that he isn't, and again, adding the obsession, with All Might, and we all, and for me personally, when it comes to the villain's life, obsession sometimes he can be, it can be used as a valuable weapon for a villain, in which it creates a villain far more better than what he was before. But also in the same time, which of course happens the majority of times, obsession can lead to a villain's downfall. When it comes to, let's just say, Syndrome, let's say Syndrome's obsession with Mr. Incredible, or Joker's obsession with Batman, or Reverse Flash with the Flash, or Gaston with Belle. Again, all of them are like different obsessions, but they all have the same thing in common. Their own obsessions, they have led them to their own downfall. And it's exactly the same thing what happened with Dark Might, like basically he went so deep into this, let's just say, delusional acting, that he believed yes, he's the next All Might. He will be the symbol of peace. He will be the next successor and everything. Like he acted in this so-called delusional world that he created, like so much that he literally forgot who he was, who he actually is, like basically like an actor who really goes deep into into a character that sometimes forgets who he actually is, kind of like basically switch of like an identity switch, let's put it that way, and that's exactly what happened with the Dark Might. Like when Nezuko and his friends basically defeat him the first time, when they basically destroyed his face and revealed who he actually is and everything, he was like, oh, my face, like, that's literally kind of proves that he really believed that he was All Might the whole time, or at least his successor. Now, I mentioned before, that this guy, he is a gangster, a showman, but also a supervillain. Now, when it comes to the supervillain part, there are all sorts of elements that he used to kind of become a supervillain. But in the same time, again, he also proved in the movie that he's a showman. The way how he speaks, the way how he does presentations, who he is, about his plan and everything. In a very showman way. And also the third thing, he's a gangster. Primarily, he's a gangster, and there's a lot of time in the movie where I noticed that he really speaks like a true gangster, when it comes to, the way how he talks, to his henchmen, or showing that type of charisma and ego that he possesses and everything, very interesting case, very interesting villain case, that's for sure, but again, there are all sorts of parts of in the movie when I feel Dark Might was impressive, and he was as a villain. He definitely was. Again, I liked his personality. I liked his power. I liked you definitely see that he has some fighting skills, that's for sure. Also high level intellect, definitely, because the way how he organized and everything, and also the way how he used what was the girl's name? Anna Scarvino, I think that was her name. Basically using her quirk to kind of make himself, more and more and more powerful. Which also brings me to another thing, that also can be used as a flaw when it comes to villainy, and that is basically craving for power. Because let me make this perfectly clear. Like, yes, he wanted to be All Might. He wanted to be the symbol of peace. He wanted to be his successor. He wanted to, create a world in his own image and everything. But every single thing that he did centered around one other traditional villain thing that we have seen all the time, and that is craving for power. And that's exactly what he was doing. Like this, the types of villain that Dark Knight is, like basically everything he was doing is basically for power, to rule above everyone else. Now, one of the things that, if I have to talk about My Hero Academia, one thing that makes him like very different, let's just say, from a villain like Tomura Shigaraki. Like, for example, Tomura Shigaraki, like, he cares for his henchmen, which I always thought that, like, for a villain that cares for his own people, I always felt like, it was kind of like a very positive side when it comes to, like, making this villain actually a far more better, interesting character. In Dark Knight's, position, he didn't give a shit about, like, his henchmen. Like he will punish them, he will kill them with no mercy or regret. Like, literally, like, in a very, and again, in a very gangster type way, like, I wanna say it. What have I done to treat me so disrespectfully? Like, you disappointed me. I had such high hopes for you, but you failed me. I do not accept failure. I do not. I'm trying. I'm doing it in kind of like a Marlon Brando, like Don Vito kind of way, But, like, it's true. It is true. He's also type of, like, one of those, like, ruthless villains that, doesn't give second chances. He tries to give henchmen a mission or a target or something, and and that way, they're trying to prove themselves to the boss and everything. But then, Dark Knight is one of those types of villains, like, hey, I'm giving you this mission, I'm giving you this chance to prove yourself. If you fail me, you're fucked. Off you go, out the window. And that's exactly, what he was doing. Even, like, the way how he hurt one of his, like, henchmen, that woman who had the quirk, I think, of dreams or something. The way how he hurt her. Like, this guy, like one thing I will say, this guy has no mercy whatsoever. No mercy. And he will do whatever it takes, even sacrificing his own Golini family, just try to reach his goal. Which, again, even though everything is centered around power, it is basically world domination. And try to build a world in his own image. Which, in a type of character villain that Dark Knight is, I would say, like, he thinks of a world where only the strongest survives. A world where basically he will rule above everyone else. And one of the things I always found impressive about villains is, like, when especially when you have, like, the type of villains who have, like, an obsession with, like, an idol they worship, like for a very long time ago, and those kind of, like, idols, they choose a successor, which in most of the cases is the main hero of the story. Dark Knight, I really love the way how he was looking at Deku. Like, he was trying to test him to see, who he is, where he comes from, is he worthy or not, and even, like, offering him, which, again, very traditional villain thing, like, basically, if he sees the hero prove himself, he's like, why don't you join me? Fight by my side. We can do so much together, and so on, and blah 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 blah. Very typical, join me, villain speech and everything. Which, again, very very classic thing to do. Now, one thing aside. Now, when it comes to, like, Dark Knight himself, again. A lot of things have said that they're like, very, very impressive. But also, Dark Knight definitely has flaws. And again, one of the things I mentioned before, and that is his ego. He's overinflated, gigantic ego. That's one of the things that literally brought his downfall, And the other thing is, which of course is one of the things that a lot of villains do, it is us underestimating your enemies, and he definitely underestimated Deku and the others, because and again, for villains, the biggest mistakes they can do is underestimating the hero. And that's exactly what Dark Knight did. And it's exactly the reason why he was defeated and everything. Twice. One when he was like in control, and the other time when he basically went bonkers. Defeated twice. Twice. You know, at least like, you know, when he went bonkers, at least like maybe he had a chance to defeat him, but nope. Same shit. Same fucking shit. You know, and again, even though like, you know, his backstory is very simple, you know, and everything. And Dark Knight himself, you know, even though he was impressive as a villain, you know, but you know, as a character itself, he's very, very simple, you know. So overall, you know, but still, even though still, you know, definitely he has flaws. And like I said, like from the arrogance to ego to underestimating your enemies to like, you know, being so overconfident, which is another thing that he does have, and that is overconfidence and being full of himself. Like this guy for the entire movie, oh my God, his ego, his overconfidence, being so full of himself, believing that what he does is good. And because there are some parts of the story where you can see Dark Knight kind of think of himself as the hero of his own story, even though, you know, when All Might told him, like, you know, you will never be like me, you will never be a successor, my successor and everything, you know, he's like, oh really? Okay, then, you know, well, the only thing I will do is, you know what, I'm going to respect your strength, but I'm going all the way to villainy, which of course, you know, that's how he called himself, Dark Knight. And another thing I have to admit about Dark Knight is that he's literally a dark side version of Izuku Midoriya. Literally, like Izuku Midoriya, if he didn't had like, you know, the goals that he had, the type of personality, the type of life that he had, you know, and a good heart and everything, if he didn't have any of that, he would literally became what Dark Knight is today. Literally, you know. So I really like that, you know, a little bit of element, you know, that he is basically a dark side version of Deku, basically. You know. So overall, I mean, look, he, you know, like every single villain, he also has flaws. And again, most of the flaws that he possesses are usually mental flaws, you know, like character flaws. Because when it comes to powers, you know, because, you know, even though in Dark Knight's case, he also has some like power flaws and everything, but mostly everything that what led to his defeat is basically character mental flaws, you know. And again, you know, usually I'm not a big fan of villains who are like, you know, trying to, you know, who are trying to prove themselves, you know, that they are somebody, because, you know, a lot of people in the past told them they're not worthy, they're nothing, they're basically pieces of shit that will never amount to anything, you know. I mean, but again, at the end, I think it depends on how the villain is written, you know. For Dark Knight, I think like he's written in a very traditional way, in my personal opinion, you know. So again, one thing for certain, you may, you know, every villain, you know, sometimes can have an idol, but being obsessed, that's not usually a very wise thing to do, you know, like, you know. So next time, I mean, if we're ever going to see another Dark Knight kind of villain, my suggestion to them is like, cool down on the obsession part, okay? Like, try to be reasonable, you know, try to be realistic, you know, like, you know, like try to use the admiration you have for your idol, you know, in a bit of more constructive, you know, way, you know, because like, at the end of the day, Dark Knight, you know, again, he wanted to be All Might, but in the end, all he wanted was power. All he wanted was power and to rule everyone and everything. That's literally what he wanted. And look what that got him. Seriously, you know. So overall, if I have to review Dark Knight, I would say he was an interesting villain, very impressive. Like, you know, even though his plan and his goal were like very generic, you know, very traditional, you know, he does have, you know, a kind of like a high level intellect, so to speak. He does have an impressive power, and seeing him in action, you know, especially when he went bonkers, you know, or kind of like, you know, when the girl kind of like, you know, kind of like, you know, made his power stronger and stronger through her quirk and everything. That was kind of like, you know, impressive. Overall, as a character itself, you know, again, very impressive. And I even criticize that he's definitely one of the most dangerous villains that Deku has ever faced, for sure. Now, I'm not saying he's like all for one or anything, no. But he's, for my personal opinion, he's very damn close. That's for sure. But in the end, the same things that he loved brought down, his own defeat. Which again, is a very, very big deal when it comes to villainy in general. So overall, if I have to rate Dark Knight, I would say I will give him. And again, for Dark Knight, that's me just being generous. I will give him 7.5 out of 10 Dark Crystals. Let's put it that way. Look, so 7.5 out of 10. Again, he proved himself to be a very interesting villain, very capable, very skilled, high level intellect. I like this plan. I like the, very traditional, like old school classic goal. But at the same time, one of the things that kind of makes me annoyed with villains, again, overinflated ego, overconfidence, arrogance, full of himself, the obsession that he had, with All Might, and the way how he basically overbelieved in himself, trying to pretend to be something that he's not, and everything. I mean, that's basically what led to his defeat. So overall, in the end, even though again, Dark Knight for me personally, he's not a bad villain, but overall, I have to say 7.5 out of 10 for me. It's pretty fair for someone like Dark Knight. And with that, here ends another Villains Review episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. But basically, so beside that, you guys, the drill. Comment, subscribe. Give me all personal thoughts about the overall My Hero Academia, movie or next. Give me all personal thoughts about Dark Knight. What did you thought of him as a villain, or as a character itself? Everything, all your opinions in the comment section down below. And until then, stay tuned for my upcoming videos, and I'll see you guys next time. And until then, Lord of Shadows signing off. See you guys next time, or as Beetlejuice would say, later, fuckers.